Fantastic. While we wait, I'm actually excited to be here. I've been wanting to start these for so long, and I would love some back and forth interaction. If anyone had any stories they wanted to share, questions that they had. I know heaps of you that come to the yoga and Pilates have lots of questions about this topic that we're going to talk about today. And man, I just have so many answers for you, and I'm so excited to share them. And in this way, where heaps of other people can be able to see all the answers as well. So I'm super excited about this starting today. So I reckon let's kick on off. So we are talking about the topic of posterior bubs and the myth of optimal positioning. So just a heads up, I have a few notes in front of me. If you see me looking down, that's what it's for. So I love this topic. This has been a huge topic that I've been researching a lot about over the last year or so, and it itself has created lots of change in my business and the way that I educate you guys and the way that I help you prepare for your normal birth experience, because there has been so much updated research that I'm really keen to talk about. So funnily enough, historically, we used to think that there was one optimal position for all women, which honestly is so funny to think about. So this theory was created, and back in the day, we didn't have to support theories with evidence. We just came up with an idea that we thought was logical and then push it forward, start treating people like a practicing your healthcare or midwifery care based on this theory that we thought was logical without any research. And then this theory has carried on until recent years, where we have discovered that there is more than one optimal position for women. So funnily enough, yeah, I just think that that's one of the most amazing changes and developments of science these day and age, is that we can't just come up with a theory and run with it because we think that it's logical. We have to back it up with evidence. And I just think that's such a positive transition for our midwifery field and obstetric field. So in regards to optimal fetal position, what we used to think was the optimal position for a baby was LOA, which is left occiput anterior. So what that means is occiput being head down for babe, and left anterior being the spine is on the left anterior side of mum. And we thought that that was the right position for every single baby. Now, when we actually think about it, logically speaking, every single woman has a different shaped pelvis, has a different shaped uterus, births differently. It is wild that we ever actually thought that there was only one optimal position for a baby. So what the research is actually coming out with at the moment is that the optimal fetal position of the babe is dependent on the individual mother. And there's heaps of different variables that can determine that. But what we as Natural Birth Co are mostly interested in is the shape of the pelvis and the shape of the uterus. So for an example, what this could include is if your uterus tilted to the left or to the front, that is going to create a different optimal fetal position for your babe, as well as the pelvis. So I've got my pelvis here. So in regards to the pelvis, what is going to indicate an optimal fetal position for babe is the shape of this inlet here. So this is our inlet where baby enters, and our birth workshop mamas will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say inlet. So the inlet is the first plane of the pelvis where baby enters the pelvis. And the shape is different for all women. So dependent on the shape is going to change the optimal position of your babe. In addition, this is our sacral prominence here. So it's the space between the end of the spine and the start of the sacrum, which is the tailbone. This is our sacral prominence. So on all women, some women it protrudes a fair bit forward, and some women it's quite flat. So this is another determining factor of what the optimal position is for your individual babe. Now, at the end of the day, we don't know what shape your pelvis is, and we don't know what the optimal position is for your individual baby. So unless we were to do an x-ray at the very end of your pregnancy before you birth, because your pelvis changes a lot during the process of pregnancy, we actually are never going to know what your pelvis is like before birth, and therefore we don't know what the optimal position is for your babe. The two most common positions that babes do start labor in is our LOA position, which is that head down back to the left anterior, and what is actually the ROP position. So the babe is on the right posterior with its head down in the pelvis. So these are the two most common positions that babe will enter birth in. Now, something that I wanted to really emphasize here is the fact that the baby chooses the optimal fetal position for itself based on your individual pelvis. This could very well include a posterior position. Yes, there is some pelvises where the optimal fetal position for your babe is in the posterior position. Now, this can be quite counterintuitive because I know that posterior babies have got a bit of a bad rap from having difficult births. Now, sometimes it is optimal for the baby to be in a posterior position. Now, what this means is that if your baby is in an optimal posterior position, you are most likely still going to have a somewhat longer labor than what you would otherwise, and a somewhat more intense labor in the sense of the pain will be in the back, and it will also tend to be a bit more constant rather than having good breaks in between contractions. That is unfortunately just one of the symptoms of having a posterior labor, even if that is what's optimally meant to happen for you. So in regards to optimal fetal position, if your pelvis is meant to have a posterior baby and it's an anterior baby, that is going to be potentially just as problematic as if your pelvis is meant to have an anterior baby and your baby is posterior. So they're much of the same. Okay, cool. That's something that I just wanted to make super duper clear. If anyone has anything to say, feel free to pop it in the chat. I can see a couple of you guys are on, so feel free to even let me know that you can hear me okay. That would be super helpful, please. I don't even know if I can see the comments, but anyways, we'll see how we go. All right, bear with me. I'm just going to check in that I'm on the right track. Okay, cool. Making sense so far about optimal fetal position. Now, does a suboptimal fetal position exist? Yes. If your baby isn't in the position that the pelvis needs it to be in, then this is going to be a suboptimal position. However, we don't necessarily know what this is. So this is where a massive element of trust and surrender to the process of birth comes in. So your baby intuitively at 33 weeks wants to get itself into the optimal position for your pelvis. It wants to start flipping to be head down. It wants to start feeling out what shape of the pelvis is, what's the inlet like, what's the sacral prominence like, to suss out how am I going to get myself out of this pelvis. Now at 33 weeks, if baby doesn't have enough space in the uterus to be able to move freely and fossick around the uterus, fossick around the pelvis, and figure out how it's going to get out, then that's when babies can really struggle to get into their optimal position because there's simply not enough space for them to explore and move around within the pelvis. So this is where the problems can happen from a suboptimal position. Now, this can be when babe's in an anterior position or a posterior position. It's just the suboptimal position for the mother's individual pelvis. So this is where we can get a bit stuck. Now, what actually decreases the space in the uterus? So from our perspective, we talk a lot about balance in the ligaments. And today, for today's session, we're going to talk about two ligaments that can directly impact the space that baby has to work with in the uterus. So first of all, we'll talk about the round ligaments. Now, the round ligaments attach from the top of the uterus down to the inside of the pubic bone. So they're at the top of the uterus down to the inside of the pubic bone, and they're two skinny ligaments, one on either side. Now, when balanced, these ligaments help keep the uterus somewhat in place. Now, when they're out of balance, and by out of balance, I mean tight, so those ligaments are shorter than what they should be. This is going to be quite symptomatic of getting that round ligament pain that's on either side of the pubic bone and runs up the uterus. This can be quite common if you were to, go through a cat-cow in yoga and you go through that arch position and you're lengthening the abdomen and you feel that tension and that lengthening and that stretching in those round ligaments either side of the uterus. That can be an indication that they're a little too tight. So that's a symptom of that. Now, with the round ligament pain, it is normal at about 15 weeks to be a bit twingy, but after about 20 weeks or so, if it's still feeling twingy and when you stretch it's still feeling a little bit twingy, then that's a pretty good indicator that they're a little bit tight. Now, as you can imagine, attached to the top of the uterus and the ligaments are shorter, they are pulling down the uterus. They are pulling the top of the uterus down. So this is simply decreasing the space in the uterus for babes to be able to move around. The second ligament that we're going to talk about is our broad ligament. So the broad ligament attaches from one side of the sacrum. It wraps around the majority of the uterus and attaches to the other side. So it's quite a wide ligament. Now, again, its job is to keep the uterus somewhat in place. We want to keep the uterus nice and stable throughout the pregnancy as the baby's growing and becoming heavier in there. Now, when this ligament is out of balance, the symptoms of that can be pain in the sacroiliac joints. So either side of the tailbone, if this big broad ligament is tight and it's pulling on the ligaments, then it's going to be pulling this sacrum forward, which is going to cause pain in these sacroiliac joints. Not to mention, on a side note, that's actually decreasing the mobility of the sacrum in pregnancy. If we don't have mobility of the sacrum in pregnancy, this can be really not conducive to having a natural birth experience. To have a natural birth, we need this sacrum to be moving up and out and twisting and warping. We need it to not stay stationary. So for our sacrum to be able to do all this movement in birth, it really needs mobility, lubrication, flexibility that we cultivate through the pregnancy. If we're not using our sacrum through pregnancy, it's going to be very stiff and awkward and more painful in the birth experience. Now, another sign and symptom of the broad ligament being tight is if baby gives an almighty kick into the front of the belly and it's kicking right into that tight ligament, it can cause a bit of a twingy feeling. So now, as you can imagine, if we're visualizing this broad ligament attached to the sacrum, wrapped around and attached to the other side, and this ligament is tighter, it is simply compressing the size of the uterus, which makes it a lot smaller as well, the size of the uterus, decreasing the amount of space babes has to roll around, move around, get itself into the position that it needs to for birth. So this is another perfect example of decreasing the amount of space in the uterus. Okay, cool. I hope this is all making sense. Definitely let me know if you have any questions on the way. Now, the question is, how do we bring balance into these ligaments? How do we bring balance in these ligaments to create space in the uterus so your baby can intuitively move into their optimal position for your pelvis? Balance in the ligaments. So first option, number one, definitely pregnancy-specific yoga is amazing at not only giving you obviously a good normal stretch out, but pregnancy-specific, we really target the specific postures and movements that you need to do for pregnancy and birth. Now, these are very specific ligaments that we like to work. We don't really worry about a lot of the other ones. We really like to focus on the specific pregnancy and birth ones. So if you can get yourself into pregnancy-specific yoga, that's great. Obviously at Natural Birth Co we do, because this is a lot of what we do is body balance, is that a lot of our yoga is primarily focused on balancing the bodies. A lot of the positions and movements we do is intentional to bring balance into your bodies. Now, option number two, if you're feeling specific symptoms that I talked about, which is the pain in the sacroiliac joints, pain when the baby kicks, that round ligament pain, and this is all specific pain regarding decreasing the space in the uterus, I really recommend doing the body balance specific workshop, which is where we specifically balance the ligaments and muscles that surround the uterus and the pelvis. So this workshop, it incorporates 5 videos, but the main one is one 30-minute flow that we expect you to do daily to bring balance into the ligaments and muscles that specifically surround the uterus and the pelvis. Now, in this workshop, we also go through the pelvic floor stuff, which is really important for other reasons that I'm going to talk about next week. But then we also talk about if you have pelvic girdle pain, or if you have how to sit, stand, and lay. The postures in regards to that is all incorporated in this workshop as well, which brings me to number 3, which we should be doing on top of whichever of the other options we choose, is always have great posture in pregnancy. It's one of those things, we always know that we should do it, and then we get pregnant and we're like, oh gosh, it's like very constant that we have to be constantly doing the correct posture all the time. We need to not slouch, we need to not round our spine, we need to not stand on one leg, cross our legs, all of those sorts of things. But it's really important that we are so consistent with it in pregnancy. And it's a really difficult thing to be motivated with, especially in pregnancy when you're tired at the end of the day. You're already so tired. You want to come home. You want to switch off. You want to lounge down in the couch. Your feet are sore. You want to just rest on the couch and put your feet up. But it is so important that we remain consistent with our posture. So important. And the best thing that I find to motivate you to do this is to simply remind yourself it's only for another 3 months or whatever you've got of the rest of your pregnancy. It's not forever, but it is for a certain amount of time that you need to be as motivated, as dedicated to your good posture as you can be. So as an example, as I said, we go into this super in depth in the body balance workshop, but as a brief example, not crossing our legs, keeping your shoulders stacked above your hips, keeping your spine super duper long so we're not really loading into our lower back. So we're not tucking under in our pelvis. We've got this nice, beautiful, neutral spine all the time. We're definitely not standing on one leg. So like, you know, when you have your one leg straight and the other leg bent, we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to be carrying heavy handbags on one shoulder, heavy groceries, definitely not a toddler on one hip. That's just asking for pelvic girdle pain. Same as when you think about, we get out of bed on the same side every day. We get out of the car on the same side every day. So then that second side is missing out, and that's creating an imbalance on the two sides, which is going to guarantee an imbalance in the uterus and in the pelvis. So really trying to keep super even, always equal weight into both feet. And I totally appreciate it's hard. I'm definitely not the best advocate of it myself, but in pregnancy, you just have to be super diligent with it. So they're my top 3 tips on how to manage balance in the ligaments, to create space in the pelvis so your babe can be in the optimal position for you, which, yes, very well may include a posterior position. Now, I wanted to break this up. I was thinking of doing this all together, but I'm actually going to break it up into 2 weeks. So next week, what we're actually going to go into is that, okay, say if your ligaments are balanced, and you're about 40 weeks and your baby is posterior, okay? That is the optimal position for your babe. We are going to talk about next week how to labor with a posterior baby to encourage labor to still be efficient and progressive, and how to cope with this posterior labor. Now, I love this topic, and I've actually not spoken about this topic in a workshop before because it's obviously very specific to women only with posterior positions just before labor. So I'm really excited to break this down with you guys. That'll be next week, probably about the same time as this week. And I super look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for jumping on.